Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classics Cinema. Our offering today is Phantom of the Opera, directed by Rupert Julian. If, like me, you grew up in the 60s and were into monster movies, your monthly Bible was Fmaous Monsters of Filmland. Fmaous Monsters, or FM as we intimates called it, was first published in 1958. It was edited and pretty much owned, at least in the minds of its readers, by its editor, a fellow monster film freak by the name of Forrest J. Ackerman. Ackerman went by several names like 4E, 4E, or the Acker Monster. This guy was, and still is to this day, a walking encyclopedia of monster film lore, and his publisher, James Warren, set the standard for him. When they were planning the first issue, Warren said to Ackerman, "I'm 10 years old. Entertain me." Taking the advice to heart, Forey made the magazine as kid-friendly as possible without talking down with the adults in the audience, sprinkling the amazing knowledge he and his contributors held forth with some of the corniest, eye-rolling puns you've ever read in your life. The formula worked and the magazine became a smash hit. Just about everyone who was anyone in horror movies in the last 6 or 7 decades read FM faithfully every month. Readers who grew up to enter the film business include Steven Spielberg, John Landis, Rick Baker, Stephen King, Wes Craven, Sam Raimi, Joe Dante. The list could go on forever. In fact, Joe Dante submitted an article entitled Dante's Inferno, which sounds a lot like one of Forey's puns, which was about the worst horror films he'd ever seen, and ended up not only getting published, but becoming a regular contributor before starting in the film business. Ackerman's house in California was known as the Acker Mansion and was packed wall to wall with the most amazing collection of horror and science fiction memorabilia I think has ever been put together. Among the thousands of items on display, there were masks, books, records, toys, and props from hundreds of movies. I still own a box full of old FMs. I'd have more, but for the periodic trash sweeps my mother performed on my collection. Even so, I managed to squirrel away a fair number of originals. I even had the great pleasure of meeting Forey at a convention in Berea one year and finally got the opportunity to shake hands and thank him for warping me in my formative years. If you were a fan of FM, then Phantom of the Opera, which was Forey's favorite movie, was pretty much the holy grail of horror films. Since it was a silent movie, the odds of actually being able to see it were pretty slim, as, at that time, TV stations would no more broadcast a silent film than they would a nudist camp movie. As a result, it acquired quite a mystique among the readers, and it was on the must-see list of just about everyone who was into monsters. I finally got an opportunity to see it a couple of years ago at Severance Hall with live organ accompaniment, and, well, let's just say that the movie I had in my head was a lot different from the reality of it. I'm not saying the film was bad, not by any means. You have to go with it a bit, of course, as the amount of melodrama in it is considerable. This is, after all, a silent movie, so the gestures used are big since everything is basically told in pantomime. And to tell the absolute truth, as far as the horror angle goes, it's tame to the point of being dull in parts. If, however, you can look past the age-related deficiencies of this film and see it for the work of art it really is, you'll find it very rewarding. One of the very interesting things about this movie is the masked ball at the Opera House, which was shot in a primitive form of Technicolor. Before I go on, let me tell you a little bit about Technicolor. The process used in Phantom was the Technicolor System 3. The previous two systems utilized a beam splitter in the camera that would record the image on film using a red and a blue-green filter. System 1 was a two-color additive process that recorded the image through filters onto black and white film. It was then projected through a special projector with two apertures that ran the image through colored filters and combined to show a color image. It was startling for audiences, but it left a lot to be desired, since there were registration problems with the filters the film was projected through. System 2 was a subtractive two-color system that used a cemented print. The first improvement was the redesign of the capturing process. Instead of using an adjustable beam splitter, a fixed prism was used and the red and blue-green images were flipped. That is, red was recorded as left to right and blue-green was recorded as right to left. The black and white film, which was half the thickness of normal film, also contained special gelatin layers. When they were developed, the silver halides were removed, but the gelatin remained as a kind of a contour map, and then were floated on a dye bath of the original complementary color, so you ended up with a forward-facing magenta print and a backwards blue-green print. The prints were then cemented together back to back and you ended up with a color print that had no registration problems, since instead of two separate rolls running at the same time, they were sandwiched together to provide one reel of color film that could be projected through an ordinary projector. The problem with this system is the side of the film facing the arc lamp and the projector would heat up, the edges would separate from the other reel, and the back side of the film would begin to cup, causing registration problems. Technicolor was kept busy and spent a lot of profit making duplicate copies to replace damaged prints that would be returned to the lab for ironing. That is, the technicians would literally iron the film in order to join the cemented reels back together. Phantom of the Opera utilized Technicolor System 3. This system took the separate matrices that were originally cemented together and printed them optically to a specially prepared clear-based film that actual color prints could be struck from, thereby eliminating cementing and the problems inherent to it. The final Technicolor system was number 4, which was based on exposing 3 separate reels of film, red, green, and blue, at the same time and then combining them in an optical printer like System 3. This process required a new camera, which was hand-built by a man named William Young, who at the time was 60 years old. The color was astounding, but there was a price for it. Because of the filtering process used in Technicolor, the film was incredibly slow. As an example, most people today who still use film instead of digital cameras employ film with a speed of about 800 ASA. This is a step up from 400 ASA film, which was a leap from 100 ASA, which in turn was a leap from 32 ASA, which had been the standard film speed for years. Lighting for motion picture film is measured in foot candles, a system of measurement based on how bright an object lit by a candle 12 inches away is. This measurement is still used today to meter light. Technicolor film was so slow that the meters read light not in single foot candles, but in hundreds of foot candles. An incredible amount of light had to be poured on the sets, which made shooting very expensive and, for the actors, incredibly uncomfortable, since the lights were so hot. It was used until 1955 when simpler color processes were perfected, but none of them matched the rich hues of Technicolor. Remind me to tell you about Eastman Color and Cinecolor sometime. Leonidas Frank Cheney was born on April 1, 1883 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Born to deaf-mute parents, he developed a knack for pantomime since, in large part, it was how he communicated with his mother and father. He quit school at the age of 10 to care for his bedridden mother, and to entertain her and his family, would go into town and spend his spare time observing the locals, then go home and, through pantomime, facial expression, and sign language, tell them about the things he had observed that day. His older brother John, who worked at the Colorado Springs Opera House, hired Lon as a stagehand, and through this job, he observed many of the great stage actors and actresses of the day as they came through the theater on tours. At the age of 19, he went on the road as an actor with a touring company and met his future wife, Cleva Creighton, a singer in Oklahoma City. An unexpected pregnancy followed, and the two were forced to leave the company and return to Oklahoma City. Needing to support his new family, Lon left the stage and went to work in the furniture and carpet-laying business, occasionally appearing on stage in vaudeville shows. Eventually, the family joined barnstorming shows touring the United States and Canada, and often as not found themselves stranded without money or lodging in small towns miles from nowhere. The family of 3 would perform on street corners and in bars, passing the hat when they finished. They eventually made it to California in 1910, and Lon found steady work as a stage manager, actor, and choreographer around the state. Cleva, thanks to her lovely voice, became a headliner in cabaret shows, and this led to the eventual downfall of her marriage to Lon. Despondent over the impending breakup, she attempted suicide by swallowing a vial of poison at the Majestic Theater, where Lon was stage manager. The poison, instead of killing her, damaged her vocal cords severely and it ended her singing career, while the scandal ended Lon's theater career. They divorced in 1914, and their son, Creighton, later to be known as Lon Chaney Jr., was placed in a temporary home for children of divorce and disaster. Lon turned to the new business of motion pictures and found work as an actor at the Universal Motion Picture Manufacturing Company, receiving his first screen credit in a short film called Poor Jake's Demise. He remarried in 1915 and was reunited with his son immediately after. By 1918, he had appeared in over 100 films for Universal, and when he asked for a raise, they refused. He quit the studio to freelance as an actor, but work was hard to find until William S. Hart, a popular actor in westerns, asked Lon to play a villain in his film Riddle Gone. His performance won high praise and led to his role in The Miracle Man, portraying the Frog, a con man who planned to swindle a blind faith healer by pretending to be crippled and then cured, only to be redeemed by the goodness of his intended victim. A contortionist, he tangled his body up in such bizarre ways it was hard to believe he wasn't really deformed. Lon became famous not only for his roles, but the way he played them. An expert makeup artist, he designed a special harness to bound his lower legs to the backs of his thighs to play a legless criminal in 1920's The Penalty, wore a 50-pound rubber hump under a rubber suit of his own design in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and tortured himself horrendously to play the title role in today's movie. His hard work paid off, and he became one of the most popular actors in Hollywood, playing diverse roles in every movie he appeared in. He played Fagin in 1922's Oliver Twist, a clown in 1924's He Who Gets Slapped, a tough drill sergeant in 1926's Tell It to the Marines, an ancient Mandarin in 1927's Mr. Wu, a police detective and a vampire in London After Midnight, an armless knife thrower in The Unknown, and dozens of other roles, becoming known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. He made his first talking film, a remake of his earlier silent film, The Unholy Three, and died soon after of throat cancer on August 26, 1930. Mary Philbin, who plays Christine, was born on July 16, 1903 in Chicago, Illinois. She appeared in 28 movies over the course of her 8-year career. She was brought to Hollywood after winning a beauty contest sponsored by Universal Studios, and they signed her to a contract. Her first movie was 1921's The Blazing Trail. The Phantom of the Opera was her 10th movie, and after she left the movie business, she spent most of the rest of her life looking after her parents. Her last public appearance was at the Los Angeles premiere of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera. She died of pneumonia on May 7, 1993, in Huntington Beach, California. The Phantom of the Opera was, to me at least, a bit of a disappointment, but how could it not be? For years I had been assured that it was the pinnacle of horror, but at the time I was reading that, I was in the single digits of my life and didn't realize that not only did the picture belong to another time, but that with all the hype I'd grown up reading, there was no way in hell the movie could have ever met my expectations. Once I looked at it through more seasoned eyes, though, it still disappointed me. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Phantom of the Opera, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.